I knew from the beginning, I was like, I want this name and brand to like obviously represent the connection to the ground. And I kept coming up with like the concept of like roots, like rooted. And I was like thinking on that word. And I was like, okay, how can it needs to be something kind of like encompassing of that. And at first I was like, I was looking at the word root in like other languages. And I originally I thought it was going to be raíz, which is root in Spanish. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then after a little more digging around, I was like, oh shit, like the mycorrhizal network. The mycorrhizal network is like the root communication network in the soil. So it's how like trees can literally send signals to other trees through the roots using fungi signals. So that's the myco is fungi, and then rhizal means of roots. So it's like of the root network. So that's where the concept of rhizal came from, is pulling it from that word mycorrhizal. And I think it just perfectly represents it, because it's like you're reconnecting to this alive information of the ground, you know. That's the way I think about it.
Mm.
And yeah, I'm like, I still just think it's like the perfect name for this. So I think it has the right look, and just so I'm really happy with the name. And then the logo too is also kind of like an interesting little Easter egg. I don't know if you know this one, but if you look up just there's a symbol that's used in like schematics of houses and stuff for like the electrical. Like there's a symbol that means electrical ground, and the electrical ground symbol. This was when I was like kind of conceptualizing logos and stuff like that. And so I stumble on that, and I'm like, you know, that kind of already looks cool. It's like this line and then these three lines. And I was like, okay, it has to be something related to that. So I took the actual symbol for that has been used for however long to signify electrical ground, and basically like modified it, gave it some different angles, came up with this like tricolor scheme. But that logo is based on like the actual symbol for electrical ground, which is also, I think, kind of cool.
That is cool. Thanks for sharing that. That I like both those stories give a deeper meaning to the entire enterprise. And while we're on the topic, I did have some other questions that I just want to make sure I asked, because I think they're going to be top of mind for folks. I know they are for me. Is since they're made of leather, what happens if it rains or if you step in a puddle and they get wet?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You know, I think there's some trade-offs with using natural materials. You know, like the plastics, like you were saying, the margins on plastic shoes are insane, and they last really well. You know, it's like a tire. It's like a tire for your foot. You know, it's this like plastic manufactured thing that costs $3 and sells for a lot. And you know, leather has real cost. It's a real native natural material, and you know that requires like a little bit different of care and like responsibility around it. So yeah, they're really like they don't do the best in water. I would generally recommend avoiding it, especially if you care about them lasting and looking good for as long as possible. It does like accelerate the wear, and just can kind of like warp things a little bit. That said, like if you get a touch of water, like I definitely have several times, and like it's not going to ruin them by any means, but it's more of a, you know, it's more of like a sun maxing day shoe. Like ideally you're kind of going on it's more of like a good weather day. But maybe eventually I'll do something like, I'm actually curious, like, I mean, I know right now it's like, it's kind of this vendetta against rubber soles, but you can actually have natural rubber, and the rubber that's used in like, you know, your classic, Nikes or whatever is rubber, but it's actually like this rubber polymer with plastic and dyes and all this stuff. But rubber comes from rubber trees. Like rubber is a natural product. It's not grounded, but but it can be natural. So maybe in the future I could do something with like a natural rubber sole, yet still figure out ways to have it grounded, like through the copper, through some other kind of system. But that could also like allow for maybe like a hiking boot or something, like something with more traction. Because that's another trade-off, is like we're talking about a literal leather sole on these, which is obviously not going to have as much traction as like a tire, you know. So like you know, the current model is more of like a casual daily wear. It's not like, you know, it's not going to replace your like active wear shoe like that you're like, you know, exercising and doing stuff in, but it's the perfect thing to just throw on for, you know, wearing for your day-to-day stuff. But yeah, you know, there's some trade-offs of getting rid of that nasty petroleum tread sole, but at the same time, it just makes it, you just feel so different wearing Rhizals, because you're like wearing something that's native, and it just like the way it hits the ground is just like flat. like even more than with my other barefoot shoes that I've wore for years. Like there's just something about that purely flat leather slab of a sole. And just so people know too, is like, because I think some people probably kind of imagine it unlike how it feels in person, because they hear that the upper is leather and the sole is leather, but so they imagine it being like extremely supple. But the reality is like the upper leather is like a soft leather, but the sole is like a serious slab of water buffalo leather, which, yes, as far as like a shoe sole goes, it's minimal, but it's not like you're wearing like a leather sock. Like it has some, it has like a slab to it. Like, so it's still a sole. So it's definitely like substantial, but still minimal, of course, and flat. And that just gives it such a like a flat, like flop of a feel. Like there's something just very natural about it, like even more so than other barefoot shoes, at least in my personal experience and like what I've heard from people. So there's something special about just like the all leather, and especially just leather touching your feet. And of course, like similar arguments to why we're avoiding polyester clothing and wearing linen and organic cotton and hemp and all these great materials. And that's something that I think is really cool, is like the insole. So like which is also flat, of course, that's just like veg tan natural leather. So very natural surface that your foot is touching, which is a pretty cool experience.